I am very emotional about, I will also be talking about the game of basketball. I'm very emotional about this, and I'm a little high on Dayquil. So if I am rambling, please forgive me. But it's funny timing that this came up now because we just got through with March Madness, which I hate. Because I always get like roped into a pool, you know, and I don't understand what's happening anymore. It's like those big water bottles where you're supposed to give to the homeless. Like, I don't know where the money's going, but like I want to look cool, so I give like a little bit. And then people hand me this bracket, and I'm supposed to like know what that means. It's basically when like the NCAA thing happens, people are basically doing like, hey, do you want to be confused for a month? And I'm like, yeah, can I pretend to be a man? That sounds good. I'll do that. Gonzaga, that's a weird name. I'll pick that. I'll choose them. I've become one of those people who hate sports, and I've become one. I wasn't always, and I dislike that, but I do have problems with sports because it's supposed to be this like leisurely activity, but now there's like post-game shows and so much money and bureaucracy, and it's like someone took something that you're supposed to use to blow off steam, and they were like, hey, let's add some steam to it. But I didn't always. Like I liked sports when I was younger. I loved basketball when I was very small. I grew up in Chicago in the late 80s and early 90s. Basketball was kind of a big deal back then. And I loved it, and then was terrible at it. And living in Chicago back then and being bad at basketball would be like living in Baltimore now and being bad at heroin. Like it was all wrong. But you have to understand, building up, I started playing when I was 9 years old. Building up to 9 years old, I was a huge Chicago Bulls fan. My dad would get tickets often, so we would go to the games, my brother and my dad and I, and we would sit up in the first balcony and next to these three guys that we called fat, and skinny. One was fat, and another was fat, and the other guy was skinny. And it was just, they were exactly like the super fans. They all had mustaches, and they would drink and chain smoke through the game. And whenever we played the Cleveland Cavaliers, they would just chant, "Lamb beer sucks! Lamb beer sucks!" throughout the entire game. It was wonderful. And we would go up to the hot dog concession, and there was a guy that worked at the concession at Chicago Stadium, and he had hook hands. He had hooks for hands. And my dad would always use him to put life in perspective. He didn't have, when I say hooks, he didn't have hooks like Captain Hook's hooks, which are sharp. These were like two bent paper clips that he could use to grasp things. In this case, hot dogs. And we would walk up there, and we would get our order. We'd order, and we'd walk away, and we'd have them, and then my dad would walk with us away from the concession. And it got to a point where like we could time it. Like my older brother, we'd walk away, and my brother would go, 3, 2, 1, and then my dad would go, boy, that makes you think, huh? Huh? You see that? You see that? He's got hook hands. You got two proper ones. Which bothered me, because like that guy's whole life wasn't hooks, you know? Like he had other things about him. It wasn't like he woke up every morning and was like, hooks for hands, hooks why? Sometimes he probably rented a movie and made a night of it. We had a basketball hoop in my backyard, and I thought when I was very little that I knew how to play. I think I would just sort of shoot and bounce the ball off the wall and have fun with it. And more often than not, I would just take photos of myself in front of the hoop, holding the ball like that. And my brother and I had disposable cameras, and we'd take photos of ourselves holding the ball. And then, because I wanted to look like a professional basketball player, I would go into the kitchen, and I would wet down the sides of my hair. And I would try and sweat like a grown-up by, like, I'd pour a cup of water on my t-shirt so that it sweat like in a V, so that it looked like I'd been playing basketball. So there's all these photos of me from when I was 5 and 6 years old, standing there with a basketball, sweating like an older divorced man, just like a huge streak. And then when I was 9, I went to St. Clement Grammar School in Chicago, and everyone played basketball, and I had to play, and I was excited to play, because I thought I was going to be good. And that's the problem, is like in my head, I'm good at sports. Like, my brain is good at sports, you know? Like, my brain understands how a man could dribble down a basketball court and then make a layup, right? But then, my brain has to outsource the job to my weird feminine limb, and I end up face down with a bloody lip. And I went in there to the first practices, and people were good. And I didn't know how they became good, because I wasn't good yet, but they were suddenly good. And I thought I was going to be good from the get-go. You don't understand, like, I always had a big ego. Even when I was a baby, I would think, ooh, I'm real soft and fun, and I look great, you know? So I always thought highly of myself. So I was sitting there like, what the fuck is going on? I'm not good at this. And it developed to a point that I slowly realized by like 5th and 6th grade, I was like, I am a bench warmer. Like, I am a bench warmer. Yeah, it's sad. I mean, I don't know if you can understand, like, the humiliation of every Saturday morning putting on a pair of breakaway pants and never having a reason to break them away. Then they're just pants. So I had to do other things. I mean, I still, like, I followed the game. I closely watched. Like, I still remember all the plays: the 2-1-2 defense, 2-3 defense, motion offense, diamond press. That was when you press is when you play defense over the half-court line. Is that right?
Yes.
Yes. And we'd have a game annually where we'd play the girls, and we had this tiny Japanese ref that worked at our school, and he would scream, "No press the girls! No press the girls!" And we would press the girls. I got to 7th and 8th grade, and this was like, I remember even hearing my mom talk about it. She's like, 5th and 6th grade, it's fun, but by 7th and 8th grade, we expect the kids to win. And I was like, holy shit. Got to 7th and 8th grade, and the coaches were these two guys who I loved. Coach Kane, who was the head coach, and then Mr. Tui. He didn't go by coach, he went by Mr. Tui, who was an old ex-Marine and like freelance Chicago journalist, who I think was just a drinking buddy of Coach Kane's. And then he started bringing him to practice, and then one day he was just like, by the way, y'all know the assistant coach here, Mr. Tui, don't you? And we were like, hi, Mr. Tui. And Mr. Tui smelled like cough syrup. And it wasn't until I myself was in a rehab thing, and this doctor was like, and a lot of alcoholics mask their drinking with cough syrup. I was like, holy shit, Mr. Tui. And they were wonderful, and I loved the team and loved being a part of it, and I took on outside responsibilities like John besides playing. So I would keep track of the uniforms. That was one of mine. And so when we started 7th grade, I, like Michael Jordan, wanted to be number 23. So I gave myself number 23. And then I was told in front of the entire team that I couldn't be number 23 because I was the worst player on the team. And I was supposed to go to the best player on the team. But what I argued was that, why don't you give it to me? Then they'll think I'm the best player on the team. But this doesn't really check out, because it's not like you would be like, oh, hey, they're down by 20 and they still haven't put in their secret weapon over there. I wonder when they'll bust that out. More often than not, I didn't play in the games ever, really. I'd play in practices though, and like what I'd do was, if I messed up, when I airballed, when I got fouled horribly, I would just I'd act like a mental patient, like if I airballed or something, I'd be like, yeah, so that they would be like, oh, this guy's not bad at basketball, he's just playing crazy. You gotta keep an eye out for him. I was also the scorekeeper too. And this led to one of my favorite instances from basketball. Is that, as I said, we went to a Catholic school. And so we would play other Catholic schools. Those were the divisions we were in. However, as some sort of expand your horizons type program, we would go play 3 Jewish schools every year. Hillel Torah, Anshi Amet, and Solomon Schechter, okay? Solomon Schechter, first Jewish school I ever played. We did not encounter Jewish kids in our grade school. It was diverse as far as blacks and Hispanics and stuff, but there were no Jewish people. So this was the first time I met Jewish people in my life, was playing Solomon Schechter. Now, let me say this. I love Jewish people. My best friends are Jewish. Seriously, I love Jewish people. I minored in Jewish studies in college. I love Jewish people. I fetishize Jewish women. But, and this is only about Solomon Schechter. This is the first Jewish people we ever met, and this is only about Solomon Schechter. They were point-shaving thieves and liars, and they were greedy, and they wanted more points, so they stole them. And I was the scorekeeper. So midway through the second quarter, my coach is pacing around like coaches pace like cokeheads. He's like pacing around, and he's looking at the score, and he's like, "Wait a minute, we got 4 more points than that." And they're just like, "No, you don't have 4 more points than that." And he goes, "Mulaney, get up in their face and tell them what's what." So I take my record book, and I'm getting up, and he was like, really get angry at him. And I get up in this grown man's face, this first Jewish man I ever met, and I'm going, "You're a liar! You're cheating us! Put those points back up!" And they didn't, and we lost by about 4 points. So there was some animosity to that school, and only that school. And then at the next practice, my coach pulled us aside and he goes, "We're not going to play Solomon Schechter ever again." I wrote him a letter, and I told him to stick it. And I picture that letter just being a single piece of paper that just says, "Stick it." Just like a gift from God or something. When I was in 7th grade, this guy transferred into our school named Mikhail Lombropopoulos. That was his name. And it didn't get any better from there. He joined the basketball team because almost every single boy had to play basketball, okay? I was terrible at basketball. He was horrible. He was horrible. He was the worst basketball player I've ever seen. When he airballed, it would go behind him. Literally, that happened. Also, he was colorblind. He was colorblind. He couldn't take geography class because they'd be like, "What country is this here in blue?" And he didn't know from blue. He didn't know what he was doing. And because his mother would drop him off at school riding a bicycle, we decided that she was a lesbian. So this guy had a lot of strikes against him. Suddenly I was off the hook. But like any kid that transfers in with a weird name who's colorblind, whose mom is a lesbian, he transferred out very quickly. And I was once again the worst player on the basketball team. And then 7th grade moved into 8th grade. And then the 7th graders join our team. We played with the 8th graders, now the 7th graders join us. And there were 7th graders playing ahead of me. Now there was one kid now who joined named Billy, who was worse than me. And he was kind of heavy, and the coach called him Tank. But he had an excuse for being bad. He had asthma. So it was like, Tank is the worst player on the team, but he has asthma. So Mulaney's the worst player on the team. This was, by the way, spoken about. Right? The same way people are like, "Oh yeah, you're that comedian." Like people used to be, "Oh yeah, you're horrible at basketball. You're the worst player on the basketball team." I hated most especially playing in front of my brother. My brother was 2 years older than me, and he was pretty good. Like, he wasn't on the starting 5. He would get the 6th man award every year, and he was respected. He was like a guy who wasn't in the mafia, but he was like friendly with the mafia. So he was like respected by the mafia, you know? But it was a basketball team. And I hated playing in front of him, or him coming to games and watching me not play. It was so mortifying. And once, when I was in 8th grade, my brother came to a game. And he was sitting in the stands, and the water ran out, like the water bottles ran out, and I knew that they were going to tell me to go get more water in front of my older brother. So I see the coach being like, and then it came down. It came I watched it like clockwork. People passing it down to the end of the. They also put us at the end of the bench. Fuck you. What is that? So they're passing the water bottle down, and they weren't saying it, but it was just like, give it to him, 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 and it gets to me, and I absolutely, like in a movie, I had the water bottles. I look up at my brother. He looks at me, and then I go, "Tank, fill these up," and I gave him the tank. I told him because he had asthma. He couldn't play. Alumni would come back and stuff me to practices. They would come back to stuff me. I found this out. like my coach's son and other kids who had already graduated would come back to practice and they would want to like go in a scrimmage with me so that they could stuff me because I was so easy to stuff. So that was like a hobby. By the way, this is a tangent. I haven't really figured this out, but I would go to Northwestern basketball camp over the summer and I was good at basketball. And I don't know, I was better. I wasn't good. I was better than terrible. And I don't know what that was. I think maybe just like being out of people's eyes, I would be a little more comfortable to play better, and then I would go back and I would be terrible again. And in 8th grade, in the middle of the season, my coach's son, Coach Kane, who I was telling you about, who was a real hero to everybody, his son, who would sometimes come and coach with our team, was murdered. He was getting out of a car and he was carjacked and he was killed. And it was like a fucking horrible tragedy throughout our neighborhood, even in the city. It was big news that this had happened. And my parents were very good friends with the Canes. They were, you know, community people and stuff. And my mother went over there, and as she tells me the story, this was the day after the shooting, and he had been upset the entire day, obviously, but completely inconsolable and not talking. And my mother went over to talk to him, and she said, "Jim," that was his name, "Jim, is there anything we can do for you?" And apparently, according to my mom, he said, "Yeah, see if John can learn how to make a jump shot." Which is awesome. And really touching. But that's how bad I was at basketball. No, it's nice. It's a nice memory. But still, like that, you know, he hadn't spoken. And the first, you know, and it was a one-liner. So the first game back, his first game back, coaching us, we all had like black ribbons and stuff on our uniforms, and it was a very sad game, and we were very happy to have him back, but he was still very emotional, and so we were, the team was kicking the shit out of the other team. We were up by like 20 or something. And I should mention that the Benchwarmers would play in the last 30 seconds if we were winning that much. It was kind of like towards the end of the Civil War, when it was just like the Union Army was just like crazy old men and boys who would like light shit on fire and rape it, and like they weren't trained soldiers, you know what I mean? It was like Sherman's March. It was just sort of a party, and we would go out there. Which I kind of always hated, because part of my rationale as to what people in the stands were thinking was that they were maybe thinking like, oh, maybe that kid's injured, so he can't play. Now when I go into the game, they're like, oh, John's not injured, John sucks. I went out into the game, his first game back. Last 30 seconds, I had half of 1 minute to not do anything wrong. I walk out on the court and I get the ball. And I don't know what it was, hubris. I decided to go for a shot, you know? And I get fouled right away. I get knocked to the ground. And this ref runs over to help me up. And he's like, hey, don't you worry, son. We're gonna get you some free throws. I was like, oh, no. That will not be necessary. If you're looking to make this up to me, might I suggest a gift certificate? Because I was about to take a shot, it was a technical foul, so they cleared the court. They were like, yeah, you go on out there, solo, really explore the space with how god-awful you are at this game. So from the stands, you could watch me shoot free throws, and you could watch like my team's bench watch me shoot free throws, you know what I mean? And they looked at that moment like some like bizarre Last Supper painting, you know? It's just people like, oh, he's not gonna shoot free throws, is he? Oh, this is a really bad idea. And my coach in the middle just like, what the fuck? I got up to the foul line, and I airballed the first one. Yeah. But I did not airball the second one.
Because, I don't know if you know this, but after you airball, the goal no longer becomes to make a basket. It's just to hit some shit. To show the people in the stands that you have a general sense of the game. So I hit some shit. Bottom of the backboard, to be precise. And that was my last year of basketball. And at the end, this was 1, 2, 3, 4 solid years of playing basketball. At the end of the 4 years, we had this big sports award ceremony where all the teams would get together. And they do this every May. And the woman who was in charge of all athletics got up to give a speech, a very important speech that I'll never forget. She got up there and she said, you know, programs like the boys' basketball program are so important because the alternative for young men could be using drugs or alcohol. And that was the first time that I ever heard that there was an alternative. And so I